Hello, my name is Becky May. I'm here today to do an oral presentation for my oral communications class. My chosen topic today is Native American life, past and present. Specifically, we will look today at cultural differences and the effects of those differences on Native American life. We will look at some of the early cultural differences between whites and natives, as well as some of the historical and current issues due to these differences. We'll be looking at conflict and domination, religion, the course of relationships, acculturation and assimilation. We'll also take a brief look at reservation life nationwide as well as on a local reservation. Next, we'll talk about stereotypes and discrimination. And lastly, I will share some responses that I received after interviewing some local Native Americans. I'm going to begin with a bit of history. According to author Stefan Aniti, in his article, The Clash of Two Cultures, Native Americans were the victims of the greediest predator they had ever faced, the white man. At the beginning, Native Americans collaborated with the first European colonists. Without their help, the first English people in the New World would not have survived the tough winter of 1607 through 1608. It was the Indians that showed the immigrants how to cultivate the land. The Indian man hunted bison, deer, turkey. He fished and gathered other food, while the women cultivated and harvested crops, ground grains for flour, and maintained the tents. The women also helped with the cutting up of the animals and processing them to be consumed later. But tensions soon developed due to the mass immigration from Europe, and with them came different methods for cultivating the land. They also brought with them cattle, horses, and pigs. The colonists also mowed the grass in order to feed their livestock. The white people changed the environment in a way unsuitable to the Indian way of life. While the Indian looked at white people as just being different and having different values, the Europeans had an attitude of superiority, and they viewed the Indians as primitive and rude. Indians lived in harmony with nature, without disturbing the natural balance. The Indian believed that anyone could use the land, but that no one owned it. The idea of owning and selling land was not understandable to the natives. To the Europeans, land ownership meant wealth, power, and a way to improve their lives. When they arrived, it was like a dream come true, because no one seemed to own the huge amounts of land. So the white man took lands from the Indian through bribery, alcohol, and numerous manipulations. They demanded that the Indians stay off their land. The white man threatened damage or harm if the Indians did not listen to them. More and more settlers arrived, and they took more and more land. Soon violence and atrocities occurred on both sides, and Indians began to be feared. Indians became known for scalping, although only a few tribes actually did this. Outnumbered and overwhelmed by weaponry, the Indians lost the battle. Indians were forced from their lands and given other lands by the government, but these reservation lands were a fraction of the size and a fraction of the natural resources compared to what was taken from them. Tribes were split and combined with traditional enemies, or they were forced to reservations far from home and far from sacred places. Many died, including women and children, while resisting or while traveling to these new lands. It was a clash between that which was sacred to the Indian and the more modern way of life of the white man. Another significant difference involved religion. The settlers believed that Christianity was the one true faith for all people. The Indians had their own beliefs and they weren't interested in changing. The settlers did not believe the Indians could be trusted because they were not Christians. They did not consider or accept that the Indians were indeed spiritual people, but just in a different way. They believed them to be evil, and this was another reason to fear them. Today, many Indians have embraced Christianity and endeavored to share their faith with their own people. An example of this, I have some printed materials that are printed and distributed by Indians and for Indians. These are common today. The fears of the settlers was unfounded. Just because the Indians were different did not mean they were bad or evil. They just had different beliefs. But today, it's very common for Indians to embrace Christianity and to encourage their brothers and their sisters to do the same. The course of relationships between Indians and whites was almost always the same route. Almost always the same course. The relationship would start out as a friendship and would begin with the trading of food or other goods. But then something would always happen to cause fear and distrust to replace the friendship. Someone would demand that an Indian stay off of a settler's land, or perhaps someone was killed. One side or the other would react to what was believed to be an attack. Men, women, and children on both sides were killed. Fear and the failure to compromise affected relationships in all areas of the new country. Today, Indians experience acculturation and assimilation. Acculturation means cultural modification or a merging of cultures. Assimilation is the process by which a person or persons acquire the social or psychological characteristics of a group. Most Indian languages are already extinct, or they are disappearing. Boarding schools in the 1800s to the mid-1900s contributed to this because speaking native languages was forbidden until just a few decades ago. During the boarding school era, native children were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in Christian boarding schools hundreds of miles away from their families. They faced severe discipline if they tried to speak their languages or practice their traditions. Children who returned home years later found themselves disconnected from their family and traditions. Loretta Afraid of Bear, a member of the Oglala Lakota tribe, stated, "Without your language or your land, you are not who you say you are." According to George Van Otten, during the first half of the 20th century, American Indians generally reacted to the dominant culture in one of two ways. Many remained on the reservations, where they were able to maintain their languages and cultures. Others left the reservations for economic reasons and often intermarried with non-Indians. Later on, most that moved off the reservations into non-Indian communities lost touch with their values, attitudes, and beliefs of their cultures, and many changed their language completely to English. In spite of acculturation and assimilation, many Indian tribes today in the United States are reviving their traditions and cultures. Some tribes have created language learning programs to preserve and pass on their tribal dialects. Ceremonies and other traditions have returned into practice. For Native Americans that choose to remain on the reservations, however, the conditions are often deplorable. These communities continue to be plagued by persistent poverty, high unemployment, high crime rates, low levels of education, alcoholism, drug addiction, numerous single-parent families, and serious health problems. In spite of efforts to improve conditions, social problems on reservations have grown worse. The author goes on to say that the deplorable conditions that characterize life on many Indian reservations are a product of forced assimilation coupled with the long-term racism of pre-21st century America. Native Americans have often suffered a great deal of discrimination in regards to employment, and also in regards to housing and social interactions. Current conditions on the reservations are just a part of a long-term problem and historical stereotypes. Native American reservations in Wisconsin are no exception to the social and economic problems of other reservations. Menominee County, dominated by the Menominee Indian Reservation, had the highest suicide rate of any Wisconsin county in 2010. Alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, and poverty have all been tied to this high suicide rate. However, mental health providers on Wisconsin reservations cited the historical trauma that has disrupted and even destroyed intricate Native cultures. Author Allie Tempest quotes Richard Monette, an associate professor of law at University of Wisconsin, an expert in laws involving Native people. And I quote, "They had societies where they had their own norms, their own values. They had customs and traditions, all of which kept their life in balance with their community, with their individuality, and with their families. They lost all that, and not voluntarily." Today, there are many stories of improved social acceptance and less discrimination in regards to Native Americans. However, this does not change the deplorable conditions on the reservations. Many of the Menominee Indians live off the reservation not necessarily by choice, but of necessity. Those that remain often turn to alcohol or drugs, which leads to other social issues. After interviewing 2 local Native Americans, it is clear that stereotypes and discrimination do not go away easily. I spoke with Kelly Shenandoah Hughes and also her adult daughter Bethany in regards to cultural differences among the Menominee people and the resulting issues. The first thing that both of them said was an issue is the reservation itself, and the fact that some people believe that the Indian should live there. Kelly stated, and I quote, "The red man was placed there and given land to make a life. But the opportunity to make a life was not given because they gave us crappy land," unquote. Kelly also stated that although the white man wants the red man to live on the reservation, the white man does not accept why the red man lives the way they live. Due to a lack of industry, there are few jobs. Thus, the reservation life is sloppy and poor. The second thing that both Kelly and Bethany mentioned was discrimination. Kelly stated that there's a stigma that says natives are less than white people. She said that this began a long time ago, but some people haven't let it go. Then she shared a personal example of discrimination that she and her non-native husband experienced when buying a house, or when attempting to buy a house. She said a few years ago, we put an offer in on a home in Shawano, which is a town 10 miles outside of the Menominee Reservation. The home was being held in trust, so the lawyer took the offer to the bank. He looked at the paperwork, saw that Kelly was native, and literally tossed it aside and said, they can never pay their bills anyway. Assumptions. Wrong assumptions. The Menominee people are known for their poverty, even when many of them live off the reservation and do just as well as the white man. The stereotyping and discrimination continues. In conclusion, I believe we can see that Native American life has changed dramatically over the years. Unfortunately, most of the changes have not been positive. Cultural differences led to conflict with, and eventual domination by, the white man. The Native American culture as it was is now mostly just part of history. Attempts to revive it are at best just memorable events. American culture has permanently changed a Native American life, both forcibly and by choice. Even though acceptance of an indigenous background seems to be growing among Americans, there is still an undercurrent of deep-rooted stereotypes and discrimination. Both sides, the white man and the Indian, lack the trust that is needed to go beyond history and root out the cultural stereotypes. If and when we can trust again and get past the past, life in the present will be better for everyone involved. Thank you for listening.